Welcome to Here's What We Know, the podcast of unexpected conversations. And I am so excited about today's guest. We're going to get to it in just a second. But first, I want to remind you, please support our sponsors because without them, frankly, I'm not here. I'm not doing this stuff. And you would miss out on today's podcast because this guy, let me start by just telling the background story of how we met. I was invited to a company retreat. He was the guest speaker. They had a lunch break. I sat down because I was the only person there. I was by myself. I sat down, which is fine. I'm more than happy with my own company. And then all of a sudden, this guy sat down at the table with me. And we had like the most wonderful conversation. It ended up making it a really cool event to an amazing event. And then after, I got to watch him do his presentation and my jaw dropped. It was one of those kind of deals where I was going like, that guy talked to me. This guy is something special. He is the CEO of Brain Trust. He also runs the Driving Change podcast, which is one of the best ones out there. And he knows I only have one complaint with it. We'll talk about that. But he is an author. He is a keynote speaker. He is a neuroscientist. He is a cancer survivor. And he is Papaw's grandson. This is my friend, Jeff Bloomfield.
Hey, welcome. I'm so thrilled to be on your show and the welcome that I got from you. And I was glad to interview you for mine recently, and that's going to be launching in this season 5 as well. So thanks for having me on. I was excited about today. Looking forward to today for a while.
This is going to be a much better episode than your podcast episode because, having me for the guest is not that big of a deal. Having you for the guest is awesome.
Oh, come on now. Making me blush. You make me blush.
I was transfixed when I saw you work. I have seen a few keynote speakers, but I can tell you this, if you're not the best, I can tell you I don't know anybody I've ever seen better.
Wow. That's high praise coming from you and your background. I really, I received that with humility. It's hard sometimes to receive those things, but it means a lot to me that you would say that. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome and you earned it. How did you get there? Now, you have one of the best backstories and y'all settle in for a few minutes because this is one of those kind of deals that you're going to be glad you heard it. Can you tell me the story of your upbringing?
Yeah, because I think, we're all a product of our life, the sum amount of our life's experiences and to some degree, if you take your backstory, your origin story back and start to realize, who you are today is a big part of where you came from. For me, I started on a 100-acre farm. My Papaw, those of you country listeners who know the Papaw as a grandfather, if those who aren't country listeners out there might not know that. So my Papaw was from Kentucky and he was a medic in World War II and he wanted a different life for the next generation. So he took his pennies that he saved up and he moved up to Mansfield, Ohio, and he bought a 100-acre farm. And for those of you who are movie buffs, know the movie Shawshank Redemption. The prison that movie was filmed at was 10 miles due south of our family farm, the plot of land that my Papaw bought. And I was really attached to his hip growing up. He was my guy. He was my mentor, my sage. Taught me how to drive when I was 5, standing between his knees on our tractor. And these Papawisms that I carried forward in my life today is, problem solvers rule the world. And the idea of the platinum rule, which is treat other people better than they expected to be treated. So it wasn't just the golden rule, you had to take it up a notch. And, growing up around this guy who just had this knack for teaching, he was a storyteller, but he wasn't a big boisterous personality. He was just very thoughtful and dynamic, and he never gave you the answers. He just asked you the questions until you arrived at a suitable answer for him. And I just grew up at his feet, not realizing that I was literally growing up at the feet of a master communicator. And he just had an 8th grade education. So I tell the story because I think, where we come from is not only a big part of where we are today, but where we're also going. And we carry that forward. And on February 2nd, 1982 was a day that lived in infamy for me because I got out the school bus to go see Papaw like I did every day. 50-yard long driveway, green Chevy Silverado sitting at the end of it for as long as I could remember. And as I made my way down that driveway, an ambulance shortly followed me. And I knew something was off. They wouldn't let me come in the house. I had to stand off by the fence row and watch him take him out on a gurney and load him into the ambulance. And I didn't know, Gary, that'd be the last day I'd ever get to see him alive. He had stage 4 lung cancer, and I was a wreck, devastated, because I didn't know this was all happening so fast. And I lost him in what was to me was a blink. And but as hard as that day was, it set the tone for what I knew he wanted for me. Was I I didn't know it in the moment. It'd be disingenuous to say I knew it in that very moment, but I came to realize pretty quickly that I was the legacy. Like I was the one, like all the stuff that he had, the vision for the next generation, the vision for, it's like that ripple, right? He dropped a pebble in the pond and the ripples came out, and I was one of those ripples. And so that idea that I had of, man, I want to live up to that legacy. It drove me to go to college. I ended up in biotech of all places, and I got to help commercialize a drug for lung cancer. And this is where my journey and my passion, not just for communication in the way that he communicated, but for biology and understanding how our bodies worked, and how to help people not have to have that same lump in their throat with their Papaw. If I could give them 6 more months or 12 more months and extend the time, I just got passionate about the stories around that. And I was a pretty good communicator. And what I didn't know was I was pretty good intuitively because I grew up at the foot of a master communicator. And I didn't realize until I got promoted multiple times, and they asked me to launch a drug for brain cancer indication that we were going after, that I started studying neurobiology through the lens of communication, functional MRI, EEG, PET scans. And I looked at it and I said, and then I'll shut up, is
Please
there's
don't.
this idea of why are great communicators great? And why are some you look at and you're like, wow, I'm just drawn to that person, and I could listen to them for hours, versus others, you're like, wow, I just want to find the nearest pencil and shove it into my eye. Like, what was the difference? And as I went down this path, I started to have these epiphanies. I'm like, wow, we can look at the brain in real time, and we can measure how it's reacting, and we can start to map the regions of the brain that are responsible for things like building trust, responsible for things like receiving change or resisting change, and mapping things that are really instrumental to how we are effective communicators or ineffective communicators. And it was just fortuitous that I happened to be in this business unit where I got to learn this stuff, and became right then and there, I'm like, okay, I'm going to shift my career to becoming an applied neuroscience researcher. And I'm going to take the concepts of biology, physiology, and psychology, and I'm going to look at all the research that's ever been done. We're going to do some of our own. We're going to go out there and try to help people understand what God put between those two ears, the most intricate, amazing machine in the universe. Can we help people understand it just a little bit better? Because if we can change the way they communicate. And if we can help them change the way they communicate, it'll help them in their relationships at home. It'll help them in their relationships at work. And that's just the little corner of the earth that we're trying to do, clean up and leave better than we found it. That's what it's about. And at the end of the day, I think it started with a little boy on a farm with a Papaw who taught him how to communicate. And he just spent the rest of his life validating why that was a good way to communicate. And now I get to do it for a living.
And that's it. When you get to be raised by a genius, and I always tell, I was the 5th child, and I always tell my sisters that, listen, I was raised by a different person than you were raised. You were raised by an intern, and I was raised by the dean of the medical school.
Isn't that funny? That's so good.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it was a different scenario, but yeah, I love the fact that that's one of the things when you watch Jeff's keynote speak, and if you go looking for a keynote speaker, you will not find one better. I just love how you communicate with an audience, and you communicate on a one-on-one basis to a group. You realize how weird that is, right?
Yeah, it is, but I would say this, and we coach people this way, is if you prepare as a speaker, and for those of you who have to, whether you're leading a meeting of 5 people or whether you're in front of 5,000, if you prepare as a speaker and a communicator that I am having a one-on-one conversation, and that's your mindset, then you'll communicate that way. And that's what I do when I walk up on a stage, whether it's in front of 5,000 people or a few hundred that was at the event that you were at. I'm literally pretending that I'm having a one-on-one conversation like you and I are doing right now. It's not a secret. It just personalizes the way that your brain then it activates in that manner, which makes you much more connecting with people. They don't feel like you're just talking over them. They feel like you're talking directly to them.
I believe you in that it can be taught, but I think there's something special when you have that intricate knowledge, when you have it just as an intrinsic value. Right. And I get that feeling with you that's what Papaw gave you, that ability to communicate, because I've done that. When I'm in front of a crowd of 500 people or 1,000 people, and I'm doing my show in front of them, it's a different show than the one I'm doing when it's just and I've orientated myself to that. So when I watch somebody who goes up there and does it completely different, that they're doing the one-on-one show in front of a crowd, that and the fact that you had, and I know everybody has people, everybody has a team, everybody has people who help them, but it all started, I think, with your guidance from your grandfather, but your vision.
Yeah, I think here's the thing. If you think about, we say this a lot, and you heard me say it from the stage that day. I say it every stage I'm on. The number one determining success factor of any individual. It's not their IQ. It's not their family of origin. It's not their socioeconomic background. It's their ability or inability to communicate. And if you think about that, I don't care what you're doing today, whether you're digging ditches or you're teaching in front of a class, a bunch of third graders, or whether you're running a company as a CEO, that one single skill, the ability to communicate effectively, will make or break every goal you have in your life, personally and professionally. So if that's the case, which I believe it is, not only because I believe it is, but we studied it and we can validate that it is, then why don't people spend more time on the skill of communication?
I love your podcast. Matter of fact, I've told you, and I'm going to say it loud, the only thing I don't like about your podcast is there's not nearly enough episodes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, I'm a busy guy.
I know you are very busy and you're very good at it. And I love the stuff. I can tell you this. I have learned something from every podcast. I've listened to all of them. And I've learned something from every one. And your ability to get to the heart of stuff. I literally had I had breakfast this morning with the CEO of a company. And I told him, I said, I'm going to go talk to Jeff Bloomfield. And he goes, who's that? And I pulled up your podcast and I said, you need to start listening to this, and you need to start listening to this today. And he's like, okay. I said, you know what he does? He teaches you how to communicate from the macro to the micro. And he's like, really? And I'm like, yeah. And he literally added your thing to the list to that day. So, I mean, I've become an evangelist.
Oh man, I love it. I'm honored for sure.
And going from there, because your story, you've said that, listen, I saw it in your bio, but I know you've worked with a cancer drug and you talked about working on lung cancer and brain cancer, but I saw the word cancer survivor and I don't remember you talking about that. And I know it's a personal thing, but I also know people pull a lot out of everybody's experiences, because I know there's people who fought that. We all know somebody. Could I ask you about that? Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm an open book, and you're right. I don't share it as often as I probably should at times because I'm a pretty vulnerable guy. I was actually in my late 20s. I just gotten engaged to who's still my wife today, almost 25 years later, and I got diagnosed with testicular cancer. And it was right in the heels of the whole Lance Armstrong craze and all the stuff that was going on. And my daughter Grace, my oldest, was 3 months old. So we had just had her essentially when I got the diagnosis. Now I was fortunate enough that I was working in oncology for a living. So I knew cancer really, really well. At the same time, when you get that diagnosis and you get smacked in the forehead with it, you don't know, no matter how much you think you don't know how you respond and react in that situation. And I remember to this day, when I got the diagnosis, I saw the films, put up on the light box, and I knew. And the radiation tech, they're not allowed to tell you, right? And you have to, and they were looking at it, reviewing it, and I'm like, what do you think? And I knew, because I had been trained to read these things as part of my profession. And man, she wasn't budging. She would not give an inch. And so I took the scans, and then I went out. I asked for copies of them, and I went out and I sat in my truck, and it was February timeframe. Sat out in the parking lot of Bethesda North Hospital, and it was a soft snowfall, cold as ice. And I remember to this day that windshield just every so often periodically clearing that snow. And it was this kind of metaphor for me. The windshield would cloud and then it would clear. It would cloud and it would clear. And I just sat there staring at the films through the light in the background. And I knew that I had cancer. And it was in that cab that day that you go through all the emotion. I just had I have a 3-month-old daughter. I got a vision for my life. This is not it, right? This is not it. Not being there to walk her down the aisle. Not part of the vision. Having more children. That's part of the vision. Like all these things start running through your mind about all the things that you think you might not get to do. And that was a 1 to 2 hour period in that parking lot with an interesting conversation between me and God. It was tough, but it was needed. And I say it was needed because I think everybody in their life, I pray that nobody has to face a moment when they think their end might be more imminent than they expected. But I think it's a healthy exercise to go through, because I went through it in that truck that day. And I remember thinking about everything. And then I remember having this overwhelming feeling of peace.
Wow.
And I don't hear, I'm not one of those people that'll say that I hear from God audibly all the time. I don't, but I believe in that day I did. And I heard one phrase: it's not the end.
Mm.
And that's all I need to hear. That was it. Put the vehicle in gear, put it in drive, turned the wipers on full speed, and away I went. And I didn't look back. And I felt the interesting thing, we can move on, but the interesting thing about this, Gary, was literally by the time I had left that parking lot, I'd already decided I've been told it's not the end. I believed it's not the end. And now I just got to go through the process of making sure it's not the end. I was at a sense of peace and calm that apparently nobody around me could muster. Because when you go start telling family and friends that you got the C word and you're only 27, 28 years old, people start freaking out. Everybody starts freaking out.
Yeah.
And so I was the voice of calm and reason because I'd already been told that it was going to be okay. Now, there you go. That's the story. And I went on through treatment, had the treatment, and the treatment wasn't fun. And the recovery from the treatment wasn't fun. And I learned a lot about myself during that time as well. But I would say that today with, 3 children, 2 of our own and an adopted daughter from India, couldn't be more blessed.
Well, and it has to add texture to the fact that you were working in cancer research. I mean, through your grandfather's diagnosis to your own personal diagnosis.
Right.
It's one thing when people are a number, right? When now you totally understand the concept. We can all sit back and go, when they hear cancer, you hear the word cancer, it turns into a tunnel and you don't hear anything else. We can hear those stories. We can believe those stories, but we can't know those stories. And
no question.
That added texture. I do want to ask you this. I'm a man of faith too, and I don't try to hide it or anything like that. Where were you on the faith journey at that moment?
Yeah, I feel like I had a pretty strong faith perspective point of view that time. Maybe as strong as it's ever been.
Before
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Before the diagnosis, was it you were as strong as you were deep into your faith before the diagnosis? Okay, cool.
Yes.
All right.
And honestly, we can move on from this as well, but I don't know how people get through those types of things without that. I just don't.
Well, and the fact that, you know as well as I do, you're in the scientific field. You've been in the scientific field. I've found there's no middle ground in the scientific field when it comes to faith. And I've talked to a number of people. I've talked to physicists. I've talked to, so many chemists. I mean, and they're either 100% all in or 100% all out, is what I've found. I've not found a lot of milky toast, when it comes to that. Isn't that great? How about your experience? Just that.
Yeah, I think so. And I think the great irony for me is, having been around a lot of scientists over the course of my career, is it takes infinitely more faith to be an atheist than it does to be a believer. Think about that.
I literally had that conversation with my son last night.
And so I often found that, and I just told my son, who's 19, just recently, I said, Drew, I'll tell you the one thing that I'm sure of today. Now, 52 years old, here's the one thing I said, when I was your age, I was certain of a lot of things at 19. I was sure of a lot of things. At 52, here's what I can tell you I'm certain of. I don't know anything. And I said, if you can get there, how quickly can you get there from 19 to where you think you know it all, or at least you have a lot of things you're certain about, to the point where you realize you don't really know anything. You're just trying to continually discover, and have the humility to recognize that you don't know everything. And in fact, the things you think you know might likely not there's a very good likelihood they're not even complete thoughts because you don't have all the information, right? So I'd say that about the scientist, right? Scientists who believe everything in the scientific principle, and they look at everything through that lens of the scientific method. I get it. I love it. It's a problem-solving skill I still use today. But at the end of the runway there, I'm still making my best guess that I understand something that's so far infinitely complex beyond my human rational understanding on anything from cellular biology, to frequencies and string theory. Like, you name it, I can take those things and try to understand them. And the people that come to the resolute decision that I now understand this, run. Run from them.
Well, and that's the conversation I was having with my son last night. He was like, because we're talking about, life on other planets and other this. And I'm like, I think there's life, but I don't know if there's intelligent life. That's a hard jump. And I said, think about it, 2024, with all of our scientific brilliance that we have now, as we record this, we still have no proof of even microbiotic life on another planet. We got nothing on anything. We've got nothing at all. And so, it's going to be a hard job to find that. And I said, and he goes, well, what about, do you think there's life out there? And I'm like, I think there's life. He goes, what do you think about dimensions? And I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, do you think they exist? I said, isn't it funny how science asked us to go on faith about dimensions? That we can't prove them. We have no way, and we'll never be able to prove them as far as we know, because if it's a dimension that we're not a part of, it's simply just not there. It's not a part of our world. I said, but they ask us to go on faith on that. He looks and he goes, yeah, that's kind of weird, huh? And I said, yeah. What you know and what you'll find out is, and I'll add one addendum to what you told to your son, everything that you think you know now, you should hold on to the belief that it could be proven wrong. It used to be in a decade. Now, within a year.
Yeah.
Because everything I was taught was wrong. In space, astrophysics, everything I was taught growing up has been turned out to be 100% wrong.
Well, and that's where taking it even a level deeper. It sounds like you were having a conversation with my son, by the way. It is, how do you know there's planets? Well, yeah. What do you mean, Dad? What do you know? How do you know there's planets? Well, because we can see them. Where you see them? I look up in the sky. I can't see a planet. What are you talking about? He's like, well, we sent satellites and I'm like, did we? How do you even know that's true? Like you're taking this. I'm getting back to the faith thing. You're putting your faith now in a governmental body called NASA, that what they're actually telling you is true. Just like, to your point, the textbooks that we used to read by a bunch of knuckleheads who thought they had the answers back in the day that turned out 30 years later to be wrong. And I'm not saying there's not planets, by the way. I'm not one of those people. I'm just saying everything we think we know, we don't, for certain, for the most part. We know certain things. I know that I'm sitting at my desk and I'm having a conversation with you on a podcast show, and I know we're using technology. There's certain things you can know, but there's a lot of things that we claim that we know. And to my son's credit, he goes, does it even matter if the other things are true or false? And I said, yeah, they don't matter to the extent that people want to die on the hill for them. And it causes bad relationships and conflict and all those things. To that extent, it doesn't matter. But to the idea that we're going to have these things that we will just know as fact, to your point, wait 20 years. Find out if they were or not, because chances are 80% of them probably were wrong, right?
Absolutely. And extrapolate, even the planets outside of our solar system. We haven't seen them. What we've seen is how they dim their sun. That's what we've seen with certain chemical things. But, I'll probably get to know from an astrophysicist tell me how wrong I am. And I'm like, yeah, well, you were wrong 2 weeks ago. All right, before the James Webb Telescope went up, you were as wrong as wrong to be.
More broader, more philosophical, the idea of faith. I would argue with any astrophysicist,
Yeah.
okay, did you launch a satellite yourself? Did you guide it up into space? Did you direct it over to take the images of the planet? Did you do all that yourself? No. So how do you know that it actually happened?
Uh-huh.
Philosophically, how do you know? It's the old, if a tree falls in the woods and no one's there around to hear it, does it make a noise? If you're so certain, you're actually going on faith that the information that was communicated back to you by the experts at, let's just say NASA, that they are telling you the truth. But you have to go on faith because you didn't actually experience it yourself.
It's the human condition. It's
Right.
the stock market, nothing but faith. Is it nothing but faith?
That's my point. So
you're going on projections. You're going on what people hope. You're going on what they. I mean, it is. As I was explaining that to my son, I'm like, it's legalized gambling. It really is, but it's faith. You got somebody who wants to buy stock thinking it's going to go up, and you want somebody to sell stock thinking it's going to go down. It's a matter of faith on both sides.
yeah, the question is when it comes to when I get into conversations with really, really intellectual people, be it scientists or whatnot, and we get into this topic, and it all inevitably kind of walks up to that line of faith versus fact. They've done such a good job of making the case for an intelligent designer that at the end you say, well, everything you just described, how is it even, if you put it in a statistical algorithm of possibilities, like it would be what, X times the what degree? Like what are we talking here? Like, and they'll give you some calculation of, well, it's probably 9 to the 8,000th degree of X to the, and they look at it and go, well, so statistically speaking, the odds of everything we know being created by an intelligent designer are far greater than that of just poof, this all just coming out of nothing, correct? And they can't deny that at that point because they've described so much complexity that their own scientific brain has to say, statistically speaking, the odds are far greater, infinitely far greater that someone designed this than it just happened.
Yeah, I do share with my kids. I'm like, because we're a family of faith, and I said, here's the other thing. I said, we have scientifically proven that people who have faith are A, happier, and B, healthier. And take the faith out of it. I don't care if it's Judaism, I don't care if it's Hinduism, I don't care if it's Muslim. Take the faith out of it. If you have a faith, you are happier and healthier. And they're pretty significant. And again, I'm talking to a neuroscientist here. How brave am I to throw numbers at the neuroscientist? It's a pretty significant number, isn't it?
The research has been done on that. There's so much stuff now that I get excited about. Like, recently they're starting to look at how the mindset of gratitude cannot coexist in the mind with the mindset of anxiety. And they're looking at the neurochemistry behind that and how that all works. And it's those people that have that positive gratitude mindset. They're releasing different endorphins and they're creating different neurochemistry in their brain. And that neurochemistry and those endorphins can't coexist with anxiety, which is tied to the endorphins and tied to the neurochemistry of fear, such as cortisol and adrenaline, things like that. It can't coexist. So we're studying those kind of things. So talk about the health impacts. Faith is very similar. When you have faith in a higher power, what you're saying is that you belong to something greater than yourself, and it puts a sense of peace on you, which lets the very system that the greater power designed to optimize. And there's all kinds of research on it, and we don't have to go, into the too many rabbit holes on it, but I agree with you wholeheartedly.
You see why I would look forward to this conversation, because this is one of those kind of deals that if you were living in my town, you would get so tired of me bugging you for coffee or cocktail. You would just be like, Gary, I got things. I've got family. I've got things, right? You do too. We're going to quick break, come back because I've got more questions for Jeff Bloomfield, and I know you're as riveted as I am, so we'll be right back.
Sterling Oak Cabinetry has one goal: to build the cabinets of your dreams. They literally specialize in custom cabinetry. No cookie cutter, everything looks the same stuff that you find at the big box stores. Your kitchen is the centerpiece of your home, and your home is your biggest investment. They can work with you or your designer to build just what you want with the materials and finish that you want. And because they're a brand new company, they'll be getting busier and busier. But if you order right now, they'll get your order to you in 6 to 8 weeks. In the world of cabinetry, that's blindingly fast. Contact Rob Scovman at RSKOVMAND at yahoo.com or go to sterlingoakcabinetry.com and get your dreams made reality tomorrow. Let's talk about the inevitable. End of life. Once I leave this earth, I can't do anything for my loved ones, but I've just learned by pre-planning a funeral or cemetery in advance takes the guesswork out when death occurs suddenly and your mind is clouded with grief. Dignity Memorial can help. My friend Tina Skurla pre-plans funeral and cemetery arrangements so loved ones don't have to. They're North America's largest provider of funeral, cremation, and cemetery services. They're dedicated to getting every detail right, and they do that by listening to you. I know it's a hard subject, but I also know we all see the sense and value of what Dignity Memorial does. Use the promo code Gary to get 25% off at Willow Glen Funeral Home. Reach out to my friend Tina Skurla today. She's committed to helping families not go through the tragedy of loss alone. Click on the link, use the promo code Gary, or email her at dmppatinaskurla.com or call 408-398-7050.
So let me go to the next level, as we were just talking about. When you mentioned the word gratitude, how does that play into the business life? It's one of the things you do. One of the things you talk about, how to communicate more effectively. And you've written the book, Neuroselling, Mastering the Customer Conversation and Story-Based Selling. So you've written these books, you give these keynote talks, but when you mention gratitude, I don't know why it struck a note for me. You know, as somebody who's trying to run his own little company here, I've tried to approach it that way, but what's the science behind it?
Yeah, if you think about, man, there's so much we could go down. There's so many paths we could take.
I know we're limited by time, so I won't make you, but please,
so good.
Go as deep as you want.
The body has a closed loop system, and we'll just speak specifically to a lot of the anatomy and physiology of the neurochemistry inside the brain, inside the body itself. We are built as these kind of self-preservation animals, right? That's kind of how we're wired biologically. And our default position of self-preservation is the brain's primary responsibility is actually not problem solving. It's not relationships or communication. It's actually survival. So if you think about that for a second, the brain's primary position is survival. Well, how does the brain know what's happening around it? It's taking in information, inputs from the systems, right? All of our systems. And if you have a fear-based mindset where you're constantly thinking that everything around you is going to kill you, eat you, like you're back in the caveman days, then your brain and body produce the neurochemistry of adrenaline, corticosteroids, cortisol, all the things in that sympathetic nervous system that will crush you and keep you in a mindset that's limited. Your innovation, creativity, and all those things are down. They're sunk. Gratitude, on the other hand, it actually reorients your entire body, not just your brain. It reorients your entire body. Most people don't know that they actually have neurons in other parts of their body, not just their brain. And there's neurons in the heart, there's neurons in the vasculature, and it's constantly in a connection, communication with the brain. So when I adopt a position of gratitude, what I'm telling the world around me is there's a degree of thankfulness and humility, which is actually very calming to the body, because now here's the difference. And this is what I hope people take away from. In order for me to have a position of gratitude, it's externally focused. When I have a position of fear, stress, it's internally focused. And so in one case, I'm hunkered down, it's stress, it's cortisol, it's adrenaline, it's all the things that cause the immune system to go down, that cause me to actually be in fight or flight mode too much, which can lead actually to depression. The minute I turn that outward and say, I'm grateful, I am now expressing gratitude. I'm expressing it outwardly, which changes my entire framing of what's happening inside my body. Because now all of a sudden, positive endorphins are flowing, dopamine, oxytocin, all the things that light your brain on fire for good because you've expressed that externally. And it has to be an actual active, repetitive behavior. Like you can't say, well, yeah, I'm grateful. And then you turn around and you move on. Like you have to express it. So that's why when I tell you, Gary, I'm grateful for us meeting out in California that day. I had no idea where this was going, but it's been adding so much value to me, becoming your friend and having you on my show and me being on you. I can express that. Even if I even think it's helpful, then I'll move on something else and I might be back in self-preservation mode. But the minute I express it, the emotional contagion kicks in. My brain starts to produce those endorphins in me. And guess what it does? Produces the same ones in you. So that's the power of gratitude. And not only in your own mind, but the ability for you to spread that good energy, as they say, right? You do. Here's the rub though. The opposite is also true. If I live in a place of fear of failure, fear of whatever, cortisol is high, my adrenaline is too high, all the different markers are negative, my immune system's low, all the things that are negative around that, guess what? You feel that too. Everyone around you does. Because we have the body's giving off this energy. We started studying it. It's not voodoo. It's not, all the woo-woo stuff. It really is there's a physical plane of energy that each of us possess. And it extends outward. Your brain picks it up and you start producing the same neurochemistry that the person around you has. So that's where I'm going with this. So that's why not only is it healthy for you to be grateful and to express it, it lights the room on fire. It lights the neighborhood on fire. Like, you know what I mean? Those positive people, when you get around them, you can't help but feel positive. It's real. There's a science behind it. Same as the inverse is true as well. You get around those people that just suck the room dry, and they're negative Nellies and they're constantly feeling stress, and you start to feel a little stress. That's why.
That's good. See, that was the whole reason you guys turned to that podcast for those few minutes right there, because you learned something. I know I did. And I love how the word express, right? Because it's those things. When I became a father, one of the things I've done, I can tell when something's wrong with my sons simply by entering the room. They don't have to say a word. I can feel when something's wrong. And as I always tell them, I've known you longer than you've known you, right? So I can feel when something's wrong. And you can pull that out. But by the same token, I realize that if I'm in a bad mood, and I got this from hearing you talk, I'll sit down to dinner if I'm in a weird mood and I'll go, hey, and I'll say our prayers and I'll say out loud, and God, thank you for my family. Thank you for these people that I get to live this life with. And you can see, when you open your eyes, you can see how almost everyone's changed because you've expressed the gratitude. And the fact that now I know that there's neuroscience behind it is amazing.
Yeah. And people don't need to know that there's neuroscience behind it, but as soon as you tell them that, they're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Because they can feel it. They can feel it.
Well,
to quote one of my good friends that you know of now, with Jimmy Yeary, the songwriter, we do a thing together sometimes called The Art and Science of Storytelling, and he's written 14 number one hits. And he's like, I don't know all that science stuff. Here's all I do know. If I feel it, you feel it. So he has such a way of just, cutting to the core. I'm like, well, yeah, there's an entire neuroscientific principle behind it. He's like, that's good. But if all I know is if I feel it, you feel it.
and that's what it is, right? I mean, that's the human condition. And that's him communicating just as effectively as you do.
Totally.
Because he understands the concept of the idea he's trying to get across. Right. And Jimmy Yeary's legendary. Look up his songs. And it's a fun podcast. And I'm going to embarrass you. And I've told you this to your face. You could sing.
That's one of my favorite hobbies.
You could sing really well. You could sing.
Yeah,
and trust me, I've listened to a lot of people who can't sing. And I'm not like my on-air partner. She is brutal. She was Simon Cowell before Simon Cowell. She would just tell people, this isn't good. You can't sing. This is, and that's a skill set. That's a skill set, right? Because we're all intrinsically people pleasers. And she was never angry or mean about it. She'd just be like, this isn't this isn't good. This doesn't compare to everybody else. And singing is so subjective. It's not like a race. Either you come in first, or you come in last. It's not subjective, but singing is subjective. And I want to be I'm like everybody else. You want to be a people pleaser, but I've also gotten to the age now where I can be honest, and you can really sing. I was pleasantly surprised when you sang, and I'm like, Jeff, you're one of those guys who could just do everything well. I kind of hate you.
I don't know about everything, but there's you come to those forks in the road. There's two things I love playing sports. So I thought when I was young, maybe one day I'd be a professional athlete. And then I realized, okay, I'm not going to do that. And so there was, the medical side I loved. And if I had to do there were one or two paths that I thought I really might have wanted to have done. And one of them was an orthopedic surgeon of all things. Cause I loved growing up on the farm. I loved building stuff. And I loved, that orthopedic surgeon is nothing more than a carpenter for the body. Right.
Yeah. I got a friend who's a surgeon. That's what he said. I'm a glorified carpenter.
Yeah, that path I thought was interesting. And then, but the other path was, I really did have a moment where I thought I was going to go to Nashville because I had a band in Cincinnati and we won Battle of the Bands 2 years in a row. And I was so passionate about music, and I loved because to me, it was an expression of the art of communicating, but through song. And I just loved it. And I almost went down that path as opposed to down the path that I did. So those are my two. You never have any regrets. You just go back and realize you're where you're supposed to be. But you also look back and go, boy, I still have those. They're still in there, right? That stuff's still in there. So I got guitars hanging on my back wall. You got them hanging on in your wall. So yeah. I still love music.
Difference is I don't play them. I never learned how to play a guitar. That's the Miranda Lambert guitar. There's a Tim McGraw guitar. And it's like, but I'm like, hey, thank you, but I don't play. And I've always, I wish I did. I wish I'd gotten around to learning how to play. And what I really wanted to play was the banjo. And
I do love it. And there's also, and we don't, spend time talking about it much, but
we can spend plenty of time talking about it. Shut up.
Well, a lot of folks already know this, but music is another one of those things that I encourage every parent to introduce that to their children at some degree, piano, guitar, something, because I didn't learn how to play guitar, by the way, until I was in my mid-20s. I always liked to sing, but I never really learned how to play guitar until I was in my mid-20s. Music opens up that part of your brain. It closes down your analytical, judgmental part of your brain, and it opens and activates that innovative, creative part of your brain and allows you to experience things differently. And you can learn better. People who are musicians, they seem to learn faster. They're more creative, even those who are technically trained. And so I always encourage folks that music's there's a neuroscientific reason why music is healthy and helpful. And the other piece I love today is, and this is why I've become such good friends with Jimmy, is I love studying the effect on the brain when you hear a song that moves you to tears. Like there's something about the communication of how the brain processes that information and where it processes it that validates other neuroscientific research. So I'm trying to merge the two together now, Gary, is what I'm saying. Is my love for the brain with my love for music. I'm like, boy, that's going to be chapter 6 in my life. If I can get that done and make a living doing it, you might see me out on the streets with a guitar on my back and in a functional MRI scanner pulling behind my truck.
Listen, it makes sense. I mean, music and my son played music because I played music in high school and stuff. And then music is also one of those things that I was good. People have heard this story. I was an all-state French horn player, 4 years in a row, and went to college and figured I went to this small college, and I figured I would grace them with my presence. I'll play French horn for you. I don't know if you've heard about me, but I'm pretty good.
Right. I'm kind of a big deal.
And then you get there and you see these kids who are phenomenally talented. And I started doing the math going, this is not Belmont. This is not Juilliard. This is Troy State in Troy, Alabama. And these people are crazy fantastic.
That's right.
My work here is done. It's the old, I've hit my level of owning and competence, and so I'm done now. But I told my boys when he tried to learn how to play trumpet, and I'm like, if you think of it, it is a physical form of math, is what it is. And he's like, what? Fair. And I'm like, because everything is syncopated. You got to have the numbers. Music is basically numbers. It's when you read sheet music, it's numbers. The notes are a certain length. You got a quarter note, you got a half note, you got a whole note, you got a 16th note, it's all numbers. And then it's just a physical thing to go with it. So it's truly one of it is a physical form of math that you have to make your body do something to produce the sound. But your brain has to be engaged to do to do the math. And it's surprising how many musicians are actually really good at math, because you have to be.
Yeah, I mean, to some degree, you're right. There's a piece of that is locked in. Well, heck, you could make an argument that everything in the universe is math.
And Americans don't like to do math. You know that as much as
Yeah, right. As long as it's not the metric system. If I get to heaven one day and heaven's running on the metric system, I'm just going to be like, okay, God, what's going on?
He's going to go, hey, did you realize the rest of the world did it except you guys?
I will say, well, yes, but I just assumed that the world revolved around America. I assumed heaven would as well. Isn't that what we've always been taught as Americans?
Well, when you talk about Jimmy, I've had so many songwriters on the show, and I am fascinated by songwriters because, as I have told them, their gift is they can capture smoke and show it to you, because what they do is so ephemeral. And it's just, and to be able to capture an idea, when you talk about tears, songs that produce tears, I don't count tragedy songs because those are designed to make you feel bad. They're designed to create it. When most of us have that honest reaction, it's because a song has struck the three chords and the truth, and it has struck it solidly. And you have your lyrics. I've got lyrics. I remember the first time I heard Rascal Flatts. I can't remember the name of the song now, but the line is, "At last I can see life has been patiently waiting for me." And I was a stage of my life.
God bless the broken road.
No, I thought God bless the broken road. It's the other one. It's I'm moving on. Right.
I'm moving on.
And
That's right.
and that I was in my mid-30s when that song came out.
Yeah.
I was in my mid-30s. I was divorced. I had no idea what was going on. And then all of a sudden I met this woman who was going to be, that I knew this woman's special. And when I heard "At last I can see life has been patiently waiting for me," because all that you can see are, there comes a time in everyone's life where all you can see are the years passing by. For me, that was the truth. Boo-hoo. And when it gets that truth, what's some of those lines, because you're such a fan, what's some of the lines that struck you that are true?
Yeah, I mean, I love that. Dude, that's a great example that you gave. And I think what great songwriters have the ability to do, and one of the things I'm kind of as a hobby passionate about is do they know that they're doing it? Or are they just so intuitively good? Like with Jimmy now, I'm working with him and he and I are writing some stuff together now. Cause I'm like, I want to know how you do this. I want you to show me how you do this so I can feel it with you. And there's a couple of things in play there with folks at his level. Number one, they're so intuitively gifted because they've done it for so long that they can string a phrase together, like you just described with Rascal Flatts. And it has such emotional punch. And they know it. But the second piece of it is they understand how to take the melody with it. And that's been a whole new lesson learned for me. I'm a decent lyricist. I can come up with some pretty good rhyme patterns and music, and because I know words pretty well and I can connect the dots on all that. But tying the melody to it in a way that pulls those words into that emotion, that's a unique gift. And that I think sometimes gets understated when you hear a song. Like when Jimmy did "I Drive Your Truck." First time I heard "I Drive Your Truck," I bawled like a baby.
Mm-hmm.
And it's such a story. And I didn't lose anybody in Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't me. But songs that take you into, from an empathy standpoint, that place you in that truck as the brother of that guy in that song, or the father of that guy in that song, where the only place he finds peace is getting in his son's truck that he lost in Afghanistan and driving around, burning out the fields. It's the only place he finds peace. That will wreck you if you let it. And you're supposed to let it. That's the beauty of songs, is you're supposed to let them suck you in because they tell you truth about you. Not about the singer, songwriter, not about whoever. It's about, the songs are supposed to tell you truth about yourself in a really good way. if you let them. And I think that's one of my all-time favorite songs, which drew me to him initially, was that he won Song of the Year for that, right? Back, a decade ago or so. And think about the storyline, the storytelling there, 89 cents in the ashtray, half empty bottle of Gatorade rolling on the floorboard, dirty Braves cap in the dash, dog tags hanging in the rear view, old school can and cowboy boots and a Go Army shirt folded in the back. This thing burns gas like crazy. That's all right. People got their ways of coping, and I got mine. I drive your truck. I mean, oh my gosh. Like, if you can't transport yourself into the cab of that truck and feel what that father was feeling, then, your wood's wet. They say, if that doesn't light your fire, your wood's wet.
Well, and that's the beauty of it. Like I said, when I talk to songwriters, and as you go through this songwriting journey, it's kind of interesting to find. I've talked to enough songwriters, but I've asked them this. I said, what's harder to write, slow song or fast song? And I've never had anybody answer other than fast song. Fast song's hardest to write. It's hardest to write. The human mind wants to do poetry. The human mind wants to do slow thing. And he goes, but you got to get me to the church on the Cumberland Road. That's hard to do. Right? It's hard to think that way.
Yeah, it is true. We did a keynote together back last summer, and we were driving from Nashville to Johnson City where the keynote was. I went and picked him up, and we were driving, and I was, just so excited to have 4 hours of dedicated time for him to share his life with me. And he found out during that time that he had gotten 2 cuts on Tim McGraw's new album, and which just released recently, right? His Standing Room Only is his latest album, and Jimmy's got 2 cuts on it. One of them's called Her. It's one of the most uniquely written love songs that you'll ever hear. And so he plays it for me in my truck, but he doesn't play me the Tim McGraw version. He played me his version. I got to hear the demo of a song that was about to be on an album of Tim McGraw's later on. And when you got to hear the songwriter tell you how he wrote every line of that song, I just sat in the truck with my hands on the wheel going, man, you really know you're in the presence of greatness. And I'm not saying that to pump him up. He's such a humble guy. It comes down to that. And I just talked to him recently about this. And this is for anybody listening. It's not that he has just like this, and there's a bunch of songwriters who've written number 1 hits, right? He hasn't even written a number 1 hit in the last 6-7 years. It's that the effort of time that they put into the craft, they take it serious, and it's way beyond 10,000 hours. And so whatever you're doing out there, for those watching and listening, whatever it is that you call, your profession. I just asked one of my guys this week. I said, do you want to be a champion? Like, what are you talking about? I said, do you know how many people in life are champions at their given field of play? Because what's required, it's this many people, and I'm holding up my fingers for those just listening. I'm holding it up about a quarter inch. It's, 1% of the population have the guts, the effort, the drive, the determination, and the resilience to be champions at their field of play. And when you're sitting with a guy like I was that day, and I kept thinking to myself, I'm in the presence of a champion. Not because of what he's accomplished, but what it took him to get to what he accomplished that people just take for granted. There's no such thing as an overnight success in anything in life, right?
No.
Like, you complimenting me on my keynote speaking is such an honor. I'm flattered. But like Tony Robbins said, people sometimes get rewarded in public for what they've spent years practicing in private. And if you knew how many times I've worked for 10 years on what it was like to walk up on that specific stage that you saw me on, I just didn't show up and fall out of my truck and walk up on stage and start talking.
Yeah.
Right. Ton of preparation.
And that's the joy of it. And I think that's one of the things that I worry sometimes, and this is not an old man standing on his porch telling people to get off his lawn, but I worry that sometimes our younger generation doesn't see that, right? Where I've spoke to schools and broadcasting schools and stuff, and they want to come out and do mornings in San Francisco as their first job and make $250,000 a year. And they're looking at me going, but look at you, and same thing. I'm like, I am from Florella, Alabama. I had to, you're seeing the tail end, right? You didn't see everything I did. You didn't see, as I've told my sons, they're like, you never work on Thanksgiving, Christmas. Do you think that's fair? And I'm like, do you know how many Thanksgiving and Christmases and New Year
Right.
days I have worked?
Right.
Because I didn't have my kids till later in life. I worked a ton of them. So you're seeing this little sliver of my life where you haven't seen what's gotten me there. And I think that's what I enjoyed about your presentation, right? Because I'm old enough to realize what went into it and to
Yeah.
watch a master craftsman. It's like watching a great stand-up. When you watch a great stand-up, they make you think they're just up there thinking and talking.
Right. That's a great analogy. Great example.
They've honed it. They've honed it to the point where it all seems extemporaneous, right? Like it's just happening. No. He knows exactly how long to pause between, and then my wife, right? He's
That's
worked
it.
that out in front of clubs. One place he went, and then my wife, that didn't work as fast. And then my wife, that didn't work. And then, okay, that worked. Okay, I waited too long. Right? It's just the math, as I said. People don't want to do the math. And that's what I love about what you do and how you present it in such a consumable way.
And to your point, it's over a decade plus of saying one thing and realizing it didn't land, having to say it a different way next time. And then, and I know how the brain works. So it's shame on me for doing it wrong the first time. Right. But, working those things out. And I would say something about the next generation, whether it's millennials or Gen Zs or alphas coming up. And I think this is fun, because I'm raising some Gen Zs and an alpha at this point. I got 23, 19, and 11. And I keep telling them the same thing. I'm like, they've all been given a bad rap, the millennials and Gen Zs and alphas. And some of it's well-earned and well-deserved. But at some point, life will hit you in the face with a 2x4. It just will. And it's okay. It's okay. I hope you're resilient enough to recognize it hits you in the face with a 2x4 and be willing to do something different. And you try to, as a coach, which I think that we are supposed to be as parents. I come from the new greatest generation, Gen X. That's why I tell people, like, we're the new greatest generation. I'm kidding. I do think there's one thing, though, that I admire the most about millennials and Gen Zs. And the research has been very clear on this now, and my own experience has validated it is. They are adamant at purpose. Like, they won't compromise. If they don't feel purpose-driven in what they're doing, and I'm generalizing, but as a culture, millennials and Gen Zs, they're so tired of Gen X's and boomers and watching them work their fingers to the bone only to get the legs cut out from under them, watching them, government control this and corporations control that, and everybody kind of fighting for their own and the money and the focus is on the wrong thing. Those generations coming up, they want no part of that. Now, at some point, they're going to have to work for a living. We all know that. But their purpose-driven mindset of the why, of it having some degree of purpose, I admire that tremendously. So I think that the world's in a good place from a purpose standpoint. The question is will it survive without productivity?
Yeah. There's purpose and there's practicality, which equals productivity.
That's right.
Look, I think I just came up a topic for you right there. I think when you...
That's true. That is true. You can't be on one extreme or the other, right? You can't be all purpose and no practicality. You got to be somewhere in the middle.
To get the productivity.
Yeah, some of the older generations, and X's included, sometimes we've missed it the other way, though, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up that way, and we're running out of time. But I mean, I've told you before, there was no emphasis on education in my house. You went to school because it was the law, but in my family's world, education didn't mean anything. You were going to grow up and have your babies and work in the factory and die at 56. That's what my dad did.
Right.
And it's so it is wonderful that they do. And as I've always said, you need everything. If you're a big hard right guy, you need the left because you need the compassion. If you're a hard left guy, you need the right because you need somebody to go, but can we afford it? Right? I mean, that's what I'm saying. Practicality, purpose equals production. So
By the way, I just said that because I know you want to try to expand your audience into the millennials, the next generation. So you can use that soundbite now and say, look, see, I care about the next generation.
I do. Listen, I've got some alphas. I've got a 12 and a 14-year-old. All right. So this is the face of optimism right here. All right. I told you I would have you out in an hour and I'm going to do it, but I want to get back on your list because I want to talk about parenting. I want to talk about sales. I want to talk about how you talk to people. There's so many things that we didn't even cover. And I knew it was going to happen because I cannot shut up and I can't stop listening when you're talking.
Well, you can't shut me up is the problem. I think, but you're right. It's a good point. Let this be the introduction to the book that Jeff and Gary Scott Thomas are going to write together over the coming months and years. How's that?
I'll give you the opening line and you take it from there.
Fair enough. Well, thank you very much for having me on. It's been a pleasure.